That night in Las Vegas, everything seemed just like any other show. The International Hotel's massive stage glittered with golden lights. The 8,000-seat arena was packed to capacity, and Elvis Presley stood center stage in that iconic white jeweled jumpsuit. But in the third row, fifth seat, sat a woman who was crying. These weren't the familiar tears of joy that Elvis had seen at his concerts for decades. This was something entirely different. Deep, silent tears filled with heartbreak. The woman appeared to be in her mid-30s with brown hair falling to her shoulders, and her eyes were filled with such pain that Elvis felt his heart constrict. He had been performing Love Me Tender when something in the crowd caught his eye, and now, as he looked at this stranger's anguish, he knew that this night would be different from every other concert he had ever given. The International Hotel's showroom was a cathedral of entertainment, designed to showcase the biggest names in show business. Its soaring ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and plush red velvet seats had witnessed countless memorable performances, but tonight would add something truly special to its legacy. The air conditioning hummed quietly, barely audible over the murmur of 8,000 excited fans settling into their seats, programs rustling, ice clinking in cocktail glasses, and the general buzz of anticipation that always preceded an Elvis Presley show. The audience was a typical Vegas mix: high rollers from the casino floors, tourists who had saved for months to afford tickets, and die-hard Elvis fans who followed him from city to city. They came from all walks of life, united by their love for the man who had revolutionized popular music and continued to captivate audiences more than 20 years after his first recording. Tonight, like every night, they expected to be entertained, to escape their everyday lives for a few hours and lose themselves in the magic that only Elvis could create. But Sarah Thompson, sitting in seat 5 of row 3, hadn't come to escape. She had come because she didn't know where else to go. 3 weeks earlier, her world had collapsed when her husband David died suddenly of a heart attack at age 38. 23 years of marriage, a lifetime of shared dreams and plans, gone in an instant. David had been her high school sweetheart, the father of her 2 children, her best friend and confidant. They had built a life together in Memphis, where David worked as an engineer and Sarah taught elementary school. It was a quiet, happy life, filled with the simple pleasures of family dinners, weekend barbecues, and Friday night dates that always began with the same question: "What do you want to do tonight, sweetheart?" The morning David died had started like any other. He had kissed Sarah goodbye at the front door, reminding her that he would be home late because of a project deadline. She had packed his lunch, the same turkey sandwich and apple that he had taken to work for 15 years, and watched him drive away in their blue Chevrolet. At 2:30 that afternoon, she was teaching her 3rd grade class about multiplication tables when the principal knocked on her classroom door with a look that Sarah would never forget. The heart attack had been massive and sudden. David's colleagues said he had been laughing at something his supervisor had said, then simply collapsed. The paramedics worked on him for 45 minutes, but there was nothing they could do. By the time Sarah reached the hospital, still wearing her teaching clothes with chalk dust on her hands, David was gone. The last words they had spoken to each other were, "Have a good day, honey, and I love you too." In the weeks that followed, Sarah discovered how unprepared she was for widowhood. Friends and family had rallied around her initially, bringing casseroles and offering to help with arrangements. But as the funeral flowers wilted and the sympathy cards stopped arriving, she found herself alone with a grief so profound that it felt like a physical weight pressing down on her chest. Simple tasks became monumental challenges. Choosing what to eat for dinner without David to consider seemed impossible. Sleeping in their bed without his familiar presence was torture. Even watching television felt wrong because David wasn't there to comment on the shows or hold her hand during the scary parts. Their answer, more often than not, was to listen to music. David loved Elvis Presley with the passion that some men reserved for sports teams or vintage cars. He owned every album, had read every biography, and could recite the details of Elvis's career with encyclopedic precision. But more than that, he understood what Elvis's music meant to people. He understood how it could lift you up when you were down, how it could make you believe in possibilities you had never imagined, how it could remind you that you were not alone in the world. Every year for their anniversary, David would surprise Sarah with with tickets to see Elvis in Las Vegas. It had become their tradition, their special time together, their chance to step out of their ordinary lives and into the glamorous world of entertainment and possibility. They would dress up, hold hands, and sing along with thousands of other people who understood that Elvis wasn't just a performer. He was a feeling, an experience, a reminder of what music could do to the human soul. The first time David had taken her to see Elvis, Sarah had been skeptical. She enjoyed music, but she didn't understand the intensity of David's devotion to Elvis Presley. That changed the moment Elvis walked onto the stage. There was something about his presence, his voice, his obvious love for his audience that transcended ordinary entertainment. When Elvis sang "Love Me Tender," David had taken Sarah's hand and whispered, "This is our song now." From that moment on, it truly was. Their annual Vegas trips had become more than just concerts. They were pilgrimages, celebrations of their love and their life together. They would stay at small hotels off the Strip, explore the city during the day, and dress up for the evening show like they were attending a sacred ritual. David would always wear his best suit, the navy blue one that made his eyes look even bluer, and Sarah would wear a new dress that David had helped her choose. They would hold hands during the slow songs and dance in their seats during the fast ones, lost in the music and in each other. Each concert had created memories that sustained them throughout the year. There was the time Elvis had pointed directly at their section during It's Now or Never, and David had sworn the king was singing just to them. There was the evening when they had splurged on front row seats for their 10th anniversary, and Sarah had caught one of Elvis's scarves when he threw it into the audience. That scarf still hung in their bedroom closet, a tangible reminder of magic and music and love. This year, the tickets had been sitting on David's desk when the paramedics carried him away. Sarah had found them later, while going through his things with the numb efficiency that grief demands. The sight of those tickets, evidence of David's plan to surprise her once again, proof of his assumption that they would have another anniversary to celebrate, had broken something inside her that she wasn't sure could ever be repaired. For 3 weeks, she had functioned on autopilot. She had planned the funeral, accepted casseroles from neighbors, returned to work because sitting at home was unbearable, and tried to answer the impossible question of how to continue living when half of herself was gone. The tickets remained on the kitchen counter, a daily reminder of a future that would never happen. But as the date approached, something strange occurred to her. David would have wanted her to use those tickets. He would have wanted her to go, to remember him, to let Elvis's music wash over her the way it had washed over both of them for so many years. It would be torture, but it would also be tribute. So here she sat, in the third row of the International Hotel, wearing the black dress she had bought for David's funeral, because it was the only appropriate thing she owned, surrounded by musicians and people who were laughing and cheering and having the time of their lives, while her heart was breaking into smaller and smaller pieces. Elvis had opened the show with "That's All Right," his voice as powerful and compelling as ever. The crowd had erupted with the kind of enthusiasm that only Elvis could generate, and for a moment, Sarah had tried to lose herself in the familiar energy. But instead of joy, she felt only David's absence, the empty seat beside her where he should have been singing along, tapping his foot, squeezing her hand during the slow songs. The setlist continued with all the favorites: Hound Dog, Don't Be Cruel, Burning Love. Each song a memory of dancing with David in their living room, of long car rides with the radio turned up, of quiet Sunday mornings when he would sing to her while she made breakfast. Every note was a reminder of what she had lost, every lyric a fresh wound in her already shattered heart. When Elvis began the opening chords of "Love Me Tender," Sarah felt something inside her break completely. This had been their song, hers and David's, the song that had played at their wedding, the song David hummed when he was happy, the song he had sung to her just a week before he died, when she was worried about their oldest daughter starting college. The tears came then, not the gentle tears of nostalgia, but the devastating sobs of someone whose grief was too big for her body to contain. She tried to stop them, tried to be quiet and respectful of the people around her who had come to enjoy themselves, but the pain was overwhelming. She doubled over in her seat, shoulders shaking, trying to make herself as small as possible, while the music that had once brought her such joy now tore her apart. She was so lost in her grief that she didn't notice when the music stopped. Elvis had been in the middle of the second verse when he saw her. Even from the stage, stage. Even through the bright lights that usually made it impossible to see individual faces in the crowd, her pain was unmistakable. It radiated from her like heat, cutting through the joy and excitement of everyone around her. In that moment, Elvis forgot about the 8,000 other people in the room. He forgot about the show, the schedule, the expectations. All he could see was a woman who was drowning in sorrow, and all he could think about was how to throw her a lifeline. He stopped singing mid-phrase, his voice trailing off into silence. The band, confused but professional, gradually stopped playing as well. The massive showroom fell quiet, except for the soft sound of Sarah's crying, amplified by the sudden absence of music. Charlie Hodge, Elvis's rhythm guitarist and longtime friend, looked at him with concern. They had performed together for years, through countless shows and unexpected moments, but Charlie had never seen Elvis stop a song like this. Elvis's eyes were fixed on something in the audience, his face filled with an expression Charlie had rarely seen, not the performer's mask, but genuine human compassion. "Ma'am," Elvis said, his voice carrying through that powerful microphone system to every corner of the arena, to every balcony and box seat. "Ma'am," the beautiful lady sitting in the third row. Sarah slowly lifted her head, her eyes swollen from crying, her carefully applied makeup ruined by tears. When she realized that Elvis Presley was speaking to her, she began crying even harder. Her hands were trembling, and the people around her turned to look at her with curiosity and concern. "What's your name, honey?" Elvis asked gently, his voice carrying the warm compassion that had made him beloved by millions. His southern accent was soft and comforting, like a father speaking to a hurt child. "Sarah," the woman replied, her voice barely above a whisper, but somehow audible throughout the silent arena. "Sarah Thompson." "Sarah Thompson." Elvis repeated her name as if he wanted to remember it forever. "Sarah, you look like you're carrying the weight of the whole world on those shoulders tonight." Sarah nodded, unable to find words. The entire arena was watching her now, 8,000 pairs of eyes focused on her grief, but somehow it didn't feel intrusive. There was something about Elvis's presence, about the way he had stopped everything just for her, that made her feel safe rather than exposed. Elvis turned to his band members, his decision already made. "Boys, take a little break for me," he said. The music gradually stopped completely, leaving just Elvis and Sarah and 8,000 witnesses to whatever was about to happen. "Sarah, I want you to come up here with me. Would you do that for old Elvis?" The arena erupted in confused murmurs. This was unprecedented. Elvis certainly acted spontaneously and interacted with his fans during shows, but calling someone on stage like this carried a different energy entirely. It felt intimate, serious, important. Security guards immediately stepped in to help Sarah navigate her way to the stage. She moved like someone in a dream, still crying, still overwhelmed, but somehow trusting that Elvis knew what he was doing. The walk from her seat to the stage felt both eternal and instantaneous. By the time she climbed the steps and stood beside Elvis under the bright lights, she was trembling not just with grief, but with the surreal nature of what was happening. Standing next to Elvis, Sarah realized how tall and commanding he was in person. She had seen him in concert before, but always from a distance. Up close, his presence was overwhelming. Not just his fame, but his genuine warmth and charisma. There was something in his eyes that surprised her, a depth of understanding that suggested he knew exactly what she was going through. "Now, Sarah," Elvis said gently, that southern accent making every word sound like a comfort. "I stopped my whole show because I could feel your pain from way up here on this stage. That's some powerful hurt you're carrying. Do you want to tell old Elvis what's got you so torn up inside?" Sarah was trembling. 8,000 pairs of eyes were on her. Spotlights were illuminating her, but there was such compassion in Elvis's voice that it felt like only the two of them existed in the world. She had never spoken to anyone about David's death except for family and close friends, but something about this moment, about Elvis's genuine concern, made her want to open her heart. "I lost my husband last month," Sarah's voice broke as the words came out. The microphone carried every syllable to the the arena, making her private grief suddenly public. 23 years we were married. 23 beautiful years. Elvis's face changed instantly. The performer's smile disappeared, replaced by genuine pain and empathy. He had lost people he loved, had experienced the kind of grief that changes you fundamentally, and he recognized it in Sarah's voice. "Oh, honey," he said softly, almost in a whisper. "I'm so sorry for your loss." The arena had become so quiet that even the air conditioning seemed loud. 8,000 people held their breath, witnessing something that felt sacred and private despite being so public. "He used to bring me to see you," Sarah continued, finding strength in Elvis's encouragement. "Every single time you came to Vegas. This was going to be our 24th time watching you perform together. But he's not here anymore, and I don't even know why I came tonight. I couldn't stay home." Elvis stepped closer to Sarah, his presence both protective and comforting. "You came because he would have wanted you to," Elvis said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "You came because 23 years of real love doesn't just disappear when someone passes on. It lives on, Sarah. It lives on in you." Sarah continued crying, but something in Elvis's words seemed to ease her pain slightly. "But I feel so alone, Elvis. Everywhere I look, I see couples holding hands, laughing together, building lives together, and I remember what we had, what we'll never have again." Elvis was quiet for a moment, thinking carefully about how to respond to such raw pain. Here he was, on stage in front of thousands of people, but all that mattered was helping this one woman who was drowning in grief. "Sarah, let me tell you something that I learned the hard way," he said, his voice carrying the weight of his own experiences with loss. "Love like what you had, real, genuine love like you describe, it's the most precious thing in this whole world. And it doesn't end when someone passes on to the other side. It keeps going, it keeps growing, it just changes form." Elvis moved the microphone slightly closer to Sarah, creating an even more intimate atmosphere despite the vast audience. "He's here tonight, Sarah. I guarantee you he's here right now, watching you be brave enough to come to our show, watching you honor the love you shared by being here." Sarah looked at Elvis with wonder, as if his words had opened a door she hadn't known existed. "Do you really think so, Elvis? Do you think he can see me?" "I know so," Elvis replied with the certainty of someone who had thought deeply about life and death and love. "And you know what else I think? I think he'd want us to sing his favorite song together." "What was his favorite song, Sarah?" Sarah tried to smile through her tears, the first attempt at joy she had made since David's death. "He loved Can't Help Falling in Love. He used to sing it to me while we danced in our kitchen." "Well then," Elvis said, taking the microphone back and looking at Charlie Hodge with a nod, "that's exactly what we're going to do. Charlie, give us Can't Help Falling in Love. Real soft and gentle like." The guitar began to play, but this version was different from any Elvis had ever performed. It was slower, more tender, more personal. As Elvis began to sing, his voice carried an intimacy that reached every corner of the arena, but felt like it was meant specifically for Sarah and the memory of her husband. "Wise men say, only fools rush in, but I can't help falling in love with you." Sarah just listened at first, tears still flowing, but these were different tears now. When the second verse came, Elvis extended the microphone toward her with an encouraging nod. "Shall I stay? Would it be a sin if I can't help falling in love with you?" Sarah's voice didn't come out at first. The crowd waited patiently, their earlier excitement transformed into something deeper and more reverent. They understood they were witnessing something extraordinary, something that transcended entertainment and approached the sacred. When the chorus came around again, Sarah found her voice. It was soft and trembling, but it was there. "Take my hand, take my whole life too, for I can't help falling in love with you." Her voice blended with Elvis's in a way that was imperfect, but beautiful, human. and real in a way that no studio recording could ever capture. As they sang together, something remarkable happened in the arena. 8,000 people who had come for a show found themselves part of a moment of healing, of connection, of love transcending death. When the song ended, the applause that erupted was unlike anything Elvis had ever heard. It wasn't the usual enthusiastic cheering of fans, but something deeper, respectful, emotional, heartfelt applause that acknowledged what they had all just witnessed. Many people in the audience were crying now, moved by the raw honesty of Sarah's grief and the tenderness of Elvis's response. Elvis gently put his arm around Sarah's shoulders, a gesture that was protective and paternal rather than romantic. "You did beautiful, honey. Just beautiful. Your husband would be so proud of you right now." Sarah was still crying, but the quality of her tears had changed. They were tears of healing now, of connection, of hope. "Thank you, Elvis. Thank you for making me feel like he was here with us." "He was here," Elvis said with absolute conviction. "And he always will be. Every single time you remember that love, every time you hear that song, every time you feel grateful for those 23 years instead of bitter about what's gone." Before helping Sarah back to her seat, Elvis whispered something in her ear that the audience couldn't hear, words meant only for her. Later, when reporters asked what he had said, Sarah would only smile and say that it was between her and Elvis and Dave. What Elvis had whispered was this: "Tomorrow morning, I want you to go to that special place you two used to go together. You know the one. Sit there for a while, and instead of being sad about what's gone, I want you to be grateful for what was. Don't run from those memories, Sarah. Live in them. Celebrate them. That's how love survives death." As Elvis helped Sarah down from the stage, the arena remained unusually quiet. The usual Vegas energy had been replaced by something more profound, more lasting. People weren't just entertained, they were changed. Elvis returned to center stage and looked out at his audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying the weight of wisdom earned through his own experiences with loss. "Tonight we all learned something real important. We learned that love, true love, never really dies. It just changes form. It becomes memories. It becomes gratitude. It becomes the strength to keep going when everything inside you wants to give up." The rest of that concert was unlike any Elvis had ever performed. Every song seemed to carry extra weight. Every lyric seemed to speak directly to hearts that had been opened by Sarah's courage to grieve publicly and Elvis's compassion in responding to that grief. The audience listened not just with their ears but with their souls, understanding that they had been privileged to witness something rare and beautiful. Sarah returned to her seat, but she was no longer the broken woman who had entered the theater. She was still grieving, still heartbroken, still facing the impossible task of rebuilding a life without her husband. But she was no longer alone in her grief. 8,000 people had witnessed her pain and Elvis's response to it, and somehow that made the burden more bearable. When Elvis sang "Love Me Tender" later in the show, the song that had originally caught his attention to Sarah's tears, she sang along. Her voice was quiet, audible only to those sitting nearest her, but it was there. She was participating in life again, even if only in the smallest way. After the show, as people filed out of the arena, many stopped to speak to Sarah. They shared their own stories of loss, offered their condolences, told her how brave she had been. A woman who had felt invisible in her grief discovered that she was seen, that her pain mattered, that her love story with David was worth celebrating rather than just mourning. An elderly man named Frank, who had been sitting 2 rows behind Sarah, approached her with tears in his eyes. "I lost my wife 6 months ago," he said quietly. 52 years we were married. I've been angry ever since. Angry at God, angry at the world, angry at myself for surviving when she didn't. But watching you up there tonight, listening to you sing through your tears, it reminded me that my anger is really just love love with nowhere to go. They stood together for several minutes, two strangers united by loss and by the healing they had both experienced that evening. A young woman named Lisa, probably in her early 20s, waited until most of the crowd had cleared before approaching Sarah. "My mom died when I was 16, she said, her voice shaking. "I've never seen anyone grieve the way you did tonight, so openly and honestly. It made me realize that I've been hiding from my own sadness for years, pretending it didn't matter because I was supposed to be strong. Thank you for showing me that it's okay to cry for the people we've lost." A middle-aged couple, holding hands and both crying, introduced themselves as Robert and Maria. "We've been married for 28 years, Maria said, "and we take each other for granted sometimes. Watching you tonight reminded us how precious this is, how quickly it can all be taken away. We're going to hold each other a little tighter from now on." Each conversation was a gift, a reminder to Sarah that she was not alone in her experience of loss and love. The community that formed around her in those moments after the concert was unexpected and healing. These strangers had become witnesses to her pain and her courage, and in sharing their own stories, they created a web of connection that would help sustain her in the difficult days ahead. Back in his dressing room, Elvis sat quietly for a long time, still processing what had happened. His manager and various associates were buzzing about the show, trying to understand the implications of what had occurred. Had it been good for his image? Would it affect future performances? Should they worry about other grieving fans, expecting similar treatment? But Elvis wasn't thinking about any of that. He was thinking about Sarah, about the depth of pain he had seen in her eyes, about the courage it had taken for her to come to the show at all. He was thinking about love and loss, and the responsibility that came with the platform he had been given. "Sometimes," he said to no one in particular, "music isn't about entertainment. Sometimes it's about healing. Sometimes it's about reminding people that they're not alone in this world, that their pain matters, that their love matters." His words carried the weight of someone who understood that fame and talent came with obligations that went far beyond simply performing songs. Elvis had always known that his music affected people, but that night he had experienced firsthand the power he had to heal, to comfort, to transform pain into something bearable. The story of Sarah Thompson and her night with Elvis spread quickly through Las Vegas and beyond. Newspapers picked it up, radio stations discussed it, and fans who had been in the audience that night told and retold the story until it became legend. But more importantly, it became inspiration. Within days, letters began arriving at the International Hotel, addressed to Sarah Thompson. People from across the country had heard about what happened and wanted to share their own stories of loss and healing. A widower from Montana wrote about how his wife's death had left him unable to listen to music for 2 years, but hearing about Sarah's experience had inspired him to play her favorite song for the first time since the funeral. A teenager from Florida wrote about losing her father in Vietnam and how Sarah's courage on stage had helped her understand that grief was not something to be ashamed of. Local news stations picked up the story, interviewing people who had been in the audience that night. The consensus was remarkable. Everyone agreed that they had witnessed something transformative, something that had changed their understanding of what entertainment could be. It wasn't just a concert anymore. One fan told a reporter, "It became a lesson about love and loss and the power of human connection." The International Hotel began receiving calls from people wanting to know if Elvis planned to make this kind of audience interaction a regular part of his shows. Grief counselors and therapists started referring clients to Elvis concerts, believing that the healing power of music and community might help in ways that traditional therapy couldn't achieve alone. Other performers began to take notice as well. Stories emerged of singers and entertainers across the country making special efforts to connect with audience members who seemed to be struggling. The ripple effect of that one night in Las Vegas was creating a new understanding of the relationship between performer and audience, between entertainment and healing. Other performers began to pay closer attention to their audiences, looking for those who might need more than entertainment. Venue managers trained their staff to watch for audience members who might be struggling. Most significantly, people began to understand understand that grief was not something to be hidden or ashamed of, but something that deserved compassion and community support. Sarah Thompson returned to Memphis a changed woman. She was still a widow, still heartbroken, still facing the daily challenge of life without David, but she was no longer crushed by the weight of her grief. Elvis had given her permission to celebrate her love story rather than just mourn its ending, and that shift in perspective made all the difference. She began volunteering with hospice organizations, helping other people navigate the terrain of loss. She shared her story, not the celebrity aspect of meeting Elvis, but the deeper truth about love surviving death, with anyone who needed to hear it. She became known in her community as someone who could sit with grieving people and offer real comfort, not empty platitudes. Sarah's work with hospice began tentatively. At first, she simply visited with patients and families, offering her presence rather than advice. She discovered that her experience with David's sudden death gave her a unique perspective on both the fragility and the strength of the human spirit. Patients found comfort in talking to someone who understood the reality of loss without trying to minimize it or rush the grieving process. Gradually, Sarah began facilitating support groups for new widows and widowers. She would start each session by sharing her own story, including the night at Elvis's concert when she learned that grief could be transformed into healing. "I'm not here to tell you that the pain goes away," she would say to the group. "I'm here to tell you that it changes, that it becomes something you can carry rather than something that crushes you." Her approach was revolutionary in its simplicity. Instead of focusing on moving through stages of grief or finding closure, Sarah encouraged people to embrace their pain as evidence of love. "Your grief is proportional to your love," she would tell them. "Don't try to diminish it. Try to understand what it's teaching you about the depth of what you've shared with another human being." Word of Sarah's work spread throughout Memphis and beyond. The local hospice organization began sending volunteers to train with her, learning her methods of compassionate presence and authentic connection. Healthcare professionals started referring both patients and family members to Sarah's support groups, recognizing that she offered something that traditional counseling couldn't provide: the credibility of someone who had walked the same path. Years later, when people asked Sarah about that night in Las Vegas, she would say that Elvis Presley had saved her life, not in a dramatic, obvious way, but in the way that matters most, by helping her understand that her grief was proof of love, that her pain was evidence of something beautiful that had existed, that David's death had not erased their 23 years together, but had instead made them eternal. The venue staff at the International Hotel would say that Elvis was different after that night too. He had always been generous with his fans, always willing to sign autographs and take pictures, but now there was something deeper in the way he connected with people. He seemed to see not just fans, but souls, not just entertainment, but healing opportunities. During subsequent shows, Elvis would often pause to acknowledge someone in the audience who seemed to need extra attention. It was never as dramatic as what had happened with Sarah, but it was consistent. A nod to someone celebrating an anniversary, a few extra words to someone who seemed lonely, a moment of direct eye contact with someone who appeared to be struggling. His band members noticed the change immediately. Elvis started looking at the audience differently after that night with the crying lady, Charlie Hodge would later remember. He still gave everything to his performance, but he also started really seeing people. He'd scan the crowd looking for folks who might need what only music could give them. The technical crew noticed it too. "We had to adjust our lighting sometimes," one of the lighting technicians recalled. "Elvis would ask us to make sure he could see the audience clearly because he wanted to connect with them as individuals, not just as a crowd." Even the wait staff and ushers became part of this new approach. Elvis would sometimes ask them before shows if they had noticed anyone who seemed to be struggling, anyone who might benefit from a little extra attention during the performance. The International Hotel became known not just as a place to see the world's greatest entertainer, but as a place where people could experience genuine human connection. The change wasn't limited to Elvis's professional life. Friends and family noticed that he spoke differently about his career, about the meaning of his music, about his relationship with his fans. He had always been generous and kind, but now there was a deeper understanding of the responsibility that came with his gifts. That night taught me something important, Elvis would later tell close friends. I learned that sometimes the most important person in the room isn't the one making the most noise. Sometimes it's the one who's suffering in silence, waiting for someone to notice, someone to care, someone to remind them that they're not alone. Sarah Thompson's story became part of Elvis's legacy. But more than that, it became part of a larger understanding about the power of music to heal, the importance of compassion, and the difference one person can make in another person's life. The concert that night had been advertised as entertainment, but it had become something far more significant, a masterclass in empathy, a demonstration of love in action, a reminder that fame and talent are meaningless unless they're used to make the world a little bit better. In the years that followed, similar stories would emerge from other Elvis concerts. Fans would write letters describing moments when Elvis had noticed their pain and offered comfort, when his music had helped them through impossible times, when his genuine care had made the difference between despair and hope. But it all started with Sarah Thompson, sitting in the third row, crying for her lost husband, and Elvis Presley's decision to stop everything just to acknowledge her pain. It was a moment that lasted only minutes, but created ripples that continue to spread decades later, reminding us that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do for another human being is simply to see them, to acknowledge their pain, and to offer whatever comfort we can. The night that Sarah Thompson came to Elvis's concert, grieving her husband's death, she received far more than entertainment. She received healing, community, and hope. And in giving her those gifts, Elvis discovered something profound about the true purpose of his talents and the real meaning of his fame. It was, as the headline would later read, the night that made history, not because of the songs that were sung, but because of the love that was shared, the pain that was acknowledged, and the healing that began. In a world that often feels cold and disconnected, it stands as a reminder that we all have the power to stop what we're doing, notice someone who's hurting, and offer whatever comfort we can. Sometimes that's all it takes to save a life. Sometimes that's all it takes to change the world.